today I'm going to be sharing with you my top 15 games for the original Nintendo Entertainment System. My very first console ever, and I've got so many amazing childhood memories, and I've got some great childhood favourites here, as well as a load of games that I've picked up since then too, including number 15, which is Snake, Rattle and Roll. This game was made by Rare, or back when they were called Rare Coin It to be more precise, just after they were called Ultimate Play the Game. And the reason I picked this over my second pick for number 15, which was going to be Marble Madness, I actually picked this one because it's quite rare for an isometric game of this age to control so well, and that is what makes Snake, Rattle and Roll so fun, is just how fast and fluid it is to play. It's such a unique game as well. You play as a snake and you're going around these isometric stages, and it's a really simple game. You just have to use your tongue to fight all the enemies and gobble up all of the little jelly beans that pop out of everything, and then when you've got enough you can ring a bell and then move on to the next stage. It's such a simple game, but it works so well, and it was really expertly programmed by Rare back on the NES. And the music's really good too, and that is actually a running theme with a lot of these games. The music in these games in particular has really stood the test of time. There's some absolute bangers, such as the second game here, which is Kabuki Quantum Fighter. Now this one is actually the first of many action platformers that I'll be sharing in this episode, and the reason that this one made my list is just that it controls really well. It also has a really unique feature where you can sort of swing off chandeliers and jump from one to the other. It's a really unique idea that I haven't really seen implemented as well in any other NES game. The game itself is fairly straightforward, but that's honestly what I enjoy from these kind of games. And it's also kind of unique in the fact that to attack you actually use the character's hair. It's a very difficult game, which again is a running theme across a lot of these action games, but it is the kind of game that just has that one more go factor. It's always your fault and not the fault of the game if you die in this one, and the music, like I said, really helps sell this game for me. And this is actually one of the games that I found later in life as well, and I still had an absolute blast with this. So that goes to show that although the NES is quite an old system these days, there are still some games that hold up really well today. Now this next game was another toss-up between two similar games. I was either going to go for Dr. Mario or Tetris 2. They're both very similar games, but in the end I chose Tetris 2 because I just generally enjoy the concept of this game a little bit more than Dr. Mario, although they are very, very similar. It's completely different to the original Tetris. This one is much more of a puzzle game. If I ever want a game to de-stress, then Tetris 2 is the game that does just that. The reason it's not higher on my list here is because I actually prefer the SNES version. I feel like I really like the improved graphics and music in that one, but the NES game's still really fun, and it is a very different experience to the original Tetris, and the two actually complement each other really nicely. Basically, the idea with this game is that there's 3 different colours that you have to match up, and there's always one shining version, and if you touch that shining one and match up 3 or more of the colour underneath it, then all of the other ones in that colour will disappear, and basically the level finishes when you get rid of all of the sparkling tiles, and then you move on to the next stage and there's just a few more different obstacles in your way. It's such a fun game, it's so rewarding to get through the levels, and I highly recommend it if you played the original Tetris and you want something a little bit different, because the sequel is almost as much fun in my opinion, but we'll get to the original Tetris a bit later on. Now for an absolute classic by Sunsoft, and that is a developer that we'll be getting back to a bit later on in this video as well, but the reason that I chose this game in particular from their library, this is Blaster Master, the reason I chose this one is because I'm a huge fan of Blaster Master Zero, which came out more recently within the past 5 or 6 years on the Switch and the PlayStation and the Xbox, and they are fantastic games made by Inti Creates, but once I'd played and finished the first Blaster Master Zero, I went back and bought the original for the NES, and I was expecting it to be really difficult to go back to and completely different to the modern games that I'd been enjoying, but actually the NES game holds up really well. It's very similar, so if you have played the new ones you'll know exactly what to expect with this. Basically, it's a mix of 3 different games in one. You've got the tank 2D side-scrolling exploration sections, and then you have the bits where you get out of the tank and you have to do some more shooting and kind of crawling around and making sure you don't die by jumping off things that are too high for you. And then the most interesting part of the game, and I really love this juxtaposition of the 2D and the top-down view, once you go into the caves or the dungeons in this game's case, it goes into a top-down view and it plays sort of like a top-down action game as well as a platformer / exploration game, so there's a load to enjoy in this game. Once again, the music is fantastic and it controls really well too, and if you did enjoy some of the later games, then definitely go back and play the original, because it's still really fun in its own right. Now next is a game that you might be familiar with under a different name. This is Shadow Warriors, also known elsewhere in the world as Ninja Gaiden. There was a weird thing in the UK where they didn't want things to be called ninjas for whatever reason, but this is exactly the same game. Well, I think some of the colours are slightly different, but the game itself plays identically. And I'm sure you know by now that Ninja Gaiden is an incredible game, and it spawned a whole series of other amazing games, and this is where it all began, and it still holds up incredibly well today. The platforming in this game is so precise, and it's so fun to get all of the different weapons and to wall jump and get your way around the stages and dodge all of the enemies, and then face off against the bosses at the end of the stage. It's so rewarding, it's so fun, and like I said, it still holds up so well today. So highly recommend Ninja Gaiden for the NES, or Shadow Warriors as it's known here, if you want to play an action game and you want a really big challenge. This is one of many cartoon-related NES games by Capcom, and they were just on fire during the NES era, and this is one of their best games. It's so different to a lot of their other games. The thing I love about this one is the fact that you can transform into different animals throughout the stage by feeding them. It's a really interesting concept, and it actually works really well in practice too. All of the different animals have different abilities and different ways of exploring the stage, and exploring really is the name of the game here. There's several keys that you have to find in the levels, and by taking over these animals' powers and rooting around the stages, you can eventually track down all the keys and open up the door at the end to move on to the next level. It's such a fun game, it has such a nice atmosphere, and again, the music is just fantastic too. So another game by Sunsoft now. I told you I'd be coming back to this company. This is Batman, and again, incredible music. This one is a little bit slower paced compared to some of the other platformers that I've mentioned, and the thing I really love about this one, well, there's two things actually. I love the atmosphere, I love the really dark and moody colour palette that they went with in this game. The animations are also really good, but the thing I really enjoy is all of the different weapons that you can find in this game, and all of the different ways that you can go about taking out the enemies. And it's just such a fun and rewarding game. Like a lot of the other games that I've mentioned already, it is extremely challenging, but even so, it's such a fun game to just go back to, and even though I haven't really got that far in the game, I really enjoy just playing through the first few stages over and over again. There's always little things that I pick up on that I missed out previously, and I'm sure if anyone else watching has played the original NES Batman before, then you'll understand why I think it's such a good game. Now for a bit of a different genre, and one of Taito's best games they ever made, this is the original Bubble Bobble. Very addictive soundtrack in this one. I'm sure if you've played the game you can already hear it humming around in your head. I'm sure I've fallen asleep just humming the soundtrack to this game before. But the game itself is fantastic. It's not quite up there with the Master System version of the game, which I think is the best version outside of the arcade, but even so, on the NES it still plays really well. It plays a little bit slower on our PAL systems than what you'd get over in America or Japan, but it doesn't really bother me that much. It's still such a fun game, and I never really know what to categorise it as. Is it an arcade game? Is it a platformer? Is it a puzzle game? If you know the name of this genre, let me know down in the comments below, because I love this style of games so much, and I would love to do a video on some of my other favourite games in whatever this genre is called in the future. But most of them actually got their start from Bubble Bobble, so it's a really historically important game, and it still holds up really well. Now for another ninja action game, and although a lot of people probably disagree, I actually rate this one slightly higher than Ninja Gaiden or Shadow Warriors. This one is called Blue Shadow. This one is maybe not quite as well programmed as Ninja Gaiden, but what is here I actually enjoy more. It's faster paced for one thing, it's also slightly more forgiving than Ninja Gaiden as well. And I also really love the boss fights and the stage layout in this game. I also love the fact, and I'm not sure whether this is a kind of trade-off with the bad programming or not, but when you attack in the air, you actually sort of get boosted forward a little bit, and I just think that is a really cool little addition to the game. Whether it was intentional or not, I'm not entirely sure, but I do really enjoy this one, and if you want to play an action platformer that's slightly, a little bit of a hidden gem you might say, then definitely give Blue Shadow a try. Now for another Capcom cartoon game. I'm sure you all saw this one come in. This is DuckTales, and yes, I know it gets a lot of love for the moon theme in particular, but hidden behind that incredible piece of music is actually a genuinely fun game as well. Much like Mega Man, which of course we're getting to, don't worry, it is coming. Much like Mega Man, at the start of this game you get a choice of different levels to go to, and as a kid I really appreciated that because I wasn't great at games, so whenever games gave me a choice of different starting levels, it always felt like there was so much more to enjoy right out of the gate, and that is one of the reasons that I loved DuckTales back then, and the reason I love it today is all of the hidden treasures throughout the stage, and the kind of interesting map designs as well. They're kind of linear, but they're also kind of adventure stages at the same time. It's such a great game, and it really does deserve to be in everyone's top NES games list. Now we're down to the top 5, and honestly, any one of these 5 could have been my number 1, and it was really difficult to organise these 5, but let's start with number 5, and we knew this one was coming. This is the original Tetris. What an iconic game. Like I said in my last video, I have such fond memories of playing this game with my mum and just being mesmerised at how good she was at the game. Well, many years later I finally managed to beat her, and I can get well over 100 lines now, and it's just such a great game to go back to, and obviously the NES version is just fantastic. It's still the one that people use today in tournaments, and if that isn't a measure of how good this version of the game is, then I don't know what is. Definitely recommend trying it. It is very difficult to go back to if you're just used to modern Tetris. It's missing a lot of the modern features that make those versions a lot easier, but if you practice playing this one, then you'll just easily breeze through any modern Tetris game. This one is a lot more challenging, but it's also a lot more fun because of that. Number 4, and a game that I have played so much I can pretty much memorise the entire game off by heart at this point. That is the original Castlevania. And while I do enjoy Castlevania 2 and 3 for the NES as well, it's always the first one that I go back to. Like I said, I've pretty much memorised this entire game, and that is basically what this game's all about. Memorising the different enemy patterns, memorising the level layouts, so you know exactly when to jump, when to attack, when to move back a bit, when to pick up certain items, when not to. It's definitely a game that's heavy on the memorisation aspect, but once you play it enough, you can really get into the flow with this game, and I used to really struggle on getting through it, but these days I can just turn this game on, play for half an hour and play it all the way through to the end, and have an absolutely incredible time. I know it's the first game in the series, but honestly, I would say that this is probably in my top 3 Castlevania games, and I've played a lot of them, so that is really high praise. Definitely recommend it if you've played some of the later games and you want to see where the series got its start. I'm not sure whether it'll hold up that well to fans of some of the newer entries in the series, but for me personally, I absolutely love everything that they did with this first game. The soundtrack, the graphics, the gameplay, everything about it is just fantastic, it really is. Now for a Nintendo first-party game, and I know there hasn't actually been that many of them, so this is actually a very late release for the NES. In fact, I think the SNES was already out by the time that Nintendo actually published this one, but that actually means that it pushed the original NES to its absolute limits, and this game is just incredible. I'm a huge fan of the entire series. Of course, I'm talking about Kirby. This is Kirby's Adventure, and they took everything that made Kirby's Dream Land such a fun game and really upped it to 11 in this version. This was actually the first one in the series when you could actually swallow the enemies and steal their powers in order to use against them. It's such a great game. I also love the hub world in this game as well, where you actually get to find the levels and you're exploring this big hub world and there's different mini-game areas. It may not be that involved, but it did feel really good back in the day. It gives it a little bit more of a cohesive feel rather than just going straight from one level to the next. I really did enjoy that. And like a lot of the other NES games here, the soundtrack is incredible, and because it is a late release, the graphics in this game are also amazing as well. It's just a really well put together game for the system, and it's definitely a showcase for what the system's capable of as well. And for these last two, I know I probably shouldn't do this because it is called a top 15, but I am kind of cheating here because there's no way that I could just pick one. So Number 2 is the entire original Super Mario trilogy for the NES. Mario 1, 2 and 3, but mostly I'm going to be focusing on Mario 3, but do not discount the first 2 games, they're both incredible as well. But Mario 3, much like Kirby's Adventure, was kind of a late release for the system, and once again it pushes it to its limits with huge sprawling worlds, loads of secrets to find, loads of different power-ups. I just really enjoy this game. I've played it hundreds of times over the years. Like Castlevania, I can probably memorise the entire game. It is a lot longer than Castlevania though. It is a very, very big, very involved game, but it's definitely one of the best Mario games that's ever been made. The level designs are fantastic. The length of the levels as well is just the right length for the level to be fun, but not to overstay its welcome. It's just so, so good. And if you've never played it, maybe you've played some of the later Mario games, and you want to go back and experience some of the older games in the series, then Super Mario Bros. 3 is definitely the one that I would recommend you try first, and then probably Super Mario World, and then go back to the first 2. But Mario 3, Mario 1 and 2 as well. If you've got a NES, there really is no excuse not to play these 3 incredible games. But with the Mario games out of the way, what does that leave for number 1? Well, once again, I'm kind of cheating here and including 3, but there is one that stands out over the others. So I am including Mega Man 2, 3 and 4. Although I do enjoy 1, 5 and 6 as well, it really is the middle of this series that I enjoy the most. Mega Man 2, of course, is probably the most memorable of the bunch. It definitely has the best soundtrack out of the 3, and of course, people just love this game. It is an all-time classic. Mega Man 3 improved a lot, but there's also some things that I don't quite like about it as much, and it does kind of drag in the later stages. But my personal favourite of the Mega Man games on the NES, and by extension, my personal favourite game on the entire system, is Mega Man 4. Again, this is a game that I grew up with. In fact, it was quite possibly the first game that I ever played, and it's definitely stuck with me, and it really has stuck in my mind all those years. It really is an incredible game from start to finish. When I was capturing footage to make these NES videos, I actually accidentally played through the entire game on stream. I was only planning on playing about 10 minutes of it, but I love the game so much that I actually played it all the way through from start to finish, and it just really lives up to everything that my memories held of this game. It is so, so good. Every level I can pretty much memorise off by heart. Again, the soundtrack is incredible. The graphics are a huge improvement over 2 and 3, and if you are thinking about getting into the Mega Man series, I definitely recommend starting with Mega Man 4. I know a lot of people would say start with Mega Man 2, but honestly this game did improve a lot from that one, and I feel it's unfairly rated in the original NES trilogy, kind of because it gets lost in the shuffle in the middle of the series, but it is definitely a standout for me and easily one of my favourite games of all time. So I really hope you enjoyed my top 15 games for my original Nintendo Entertainment System. If you want to see my memories of the system and where I got my start with gaming, then click the video up here and watch that one next.